Welcome to our viewer on our atomic adventure.
Welcome to the second instalment of the Life of Tom Ploy, and these cover the years 7 to 14. The good. When this period started, he's still at lower school, and he does remember that in the last couple of years there, they still had desks with inkwells, and you used a nib pen that you dip into the ink. Often the ink would drip everywhere, and of course it was very tempting to dip the girl in front's pigtails into the well.
Of course he wouldn't do that.
Of course not.
Good.
Are you kidding? Of course he did. As I'm sure she wanted to look like Harley Quinn, and who was he to deny her that pleasure? Even at this age, he liked to have a space of his own, where things wouldn't be thrown away or damaged. So he made a shed in the garden?
Did you say a shed?
Okay, it was more like a stack of old furniture and a tarpaulin draped over the top and sides to keep the worst of the weather out. He even bought a carpentry kit out of a home catalogue where you pay so much per week. And this was the start of him learning what was a safer way to do things.
Oh, you mean all the scars on his hands were there to remind him not to cut towards himself and always remove nails from pieces of wood?
Yes, looking back, it's quite funny that he walked to his own repair shop. Anyway, while erecting the workplace, he stood on a piece of wood and felt a sharp pain in his foot. So he lifted it off the ground and looked down to see the end of a nail sticking up between his shoelaces and what resembled a ski attached to the bottom of his shoe.
Bit of a slow learner, was he?
Yes, but tried not to let any adversary get in the way.
What was he into in the pre-girlfriend era?
Oh, he always had and still has female friends without the need for being in a relationship. Like most kids his age at that time, making things was a big part of life back then.
Why is that?
Well, to be honest, there wasn't much else to do, so you had to keep yourself entertained.
So what was he into?
He made the normal things like kites, airfix kits, and of course, because this period covered the late 1960s, it had to include 2 model kits, one of the Saturn V rocket and another in a larger scale of the module, including the Eagle. There was no way he was going to miss this event, so he stayed up and watched it on an old black and white telly, and even by the standard of the day, the quality was poor.
I bet the broadband signal was sketchy up there.
Anyway, it was one of only a few TV moments he remembers from back then. The Apollo landing, Tales of the Riverbank and the Wooden Tops.
Was that one of those old police dramas?
Okay, where were we?
You were saying about things he made.
Oh, and a jousting helmet and shield made from chicken wire and paper mache, and soon realised he needed a workstation.
Just think what fun he would have had if he'd had access to the modern materials they use to make cosplay outfits.
Oh, I dread to think.
Would have been fun though.
And by the end of this chapter of his life, he also built a workbench with a vise to making other things easier, including the odd projects like dining table,
And he's still sitting at it while doing this stuff?
footstool, and at one time saw a kit for a wooden canoe that you assemble yourself in a newspaper.
I bet he thought he could go on river trips.
Of course, and looking back, it was probably a wise decision not to have done that.
Especially as he couldn't swim back then.
True, but even then, his love of flight guided him to make things like a glider made of balsa and tissue and dope, and was very pleased with the results. So took it to a field, attached a tow line, started running and had it flying on the first attempt. In fact, it flew so well that it stayed level and true and flew until it was a speck in the distance, never to be seen again.
Annoying.
You would have thought so, but that didn't discourage him. Instead, added to the mystery of flight which never left him.
What was his next school like?
He just found the whole experience totally boring, and there were times he would be literally bored to tears. The first 5 minutes were fine, but after that, it was just repeating the same information again and again.
What about the teachers there?
Didn't get off to the best start as even at age 11.
Why, what happened?
Well, in the first PE lesson, the PE teacher wanted boys for the football team and said anyone who could beat him in a race was guaranteed a place. The whole class lined up, and with the normal, ready, steady, go. And they were off.
Although I bet the teacher thought he'd easily win, right?
You have to remember, even at 11, Tom could run faster than most people could do on a bike.
So I'm guessing the teacher didn't win.
No, and he wasn't happy at being easily beaten, but stuck to his word and offered Tom a place on the football team, only for Tom to say it's okay, as I don't like football.
I bet that went down well.
Certainly didn't, and wasn't helped when he also ran around the rugby coach, who wanted to show how you would catch and tackle an opponent safely.
Little bugger.
He'd always liked to try things for himself, regularly cutting his own and others' hair, and once he even dyed just the front half jet black just to see if it could be done. To help pay for the things he wanted, he'd do a paper round, and 7 days a week he would be in town at 6 a.m. for when the shop opened. Although his favourite job at this time was working in a bakery shop, he only greased the tins but enjoyed the baker's artistry when they kneaded 2 loaves at the same time, and loved the smell of fresh bread.
But how did he get to these places as they weren't local?
On a trusty old bike, he would ride over 5 miles a day to deliver the papers and 10 miles for the bakery.
Good way of keeping fit.
He loved woodwork and technical drawing, and even did a year in domestic science. But even when he found a subject he could get something from, they changed everything. And when he came back from the summer holiday in the last year, only to find that these had been swapped for metalwork and needlework. But at least he learned how to adapt a pair of jeans to make them into 22-inch flares.
What a plum!
Maybe, but for him that was the end of any interest in school and resulted in more days away from it, and left as soon as he could. Throughout those school days, he was often requested by the teaching staff that he had to wear the school uniform.
Weren't they happy with what he chose to wear?
Well, it wasn't regulation.
Go on.
He decided that the look for him was improved by wearing black dungarees, calf-length black platform boots with a 4-inch heel and a black blazer he'd bought from Kensington High Street on one of his days out where he took the train to London, and his school badge was replaced by a Wile E. Coyote embroidered badge.
How did they try to enforce it, and did it work?
Well, they threatened to send him home if he wasn't wearing the correct attire, which to be honest was a brilliant result for him. He even offered to go then and there. Oh, and don't forget the long hair and facial hair debacle.
He matured early then?
Well, physically, if not mentally. A big memory was when his brother was cooking a meal in the school holidays as his dad was on nights and asleep upstairs.
What did he cook?
I know it included chips. At this time, it was a common practice to fry in an open saucepan. I presume his brother wasn't up on his Archimedes theory, as while lowering the chips into the pan, the oil caught fire. Tom ran to wake his dad, and can still remember him running down the stairs in just his underwear to pick up the flaming pan and carry it out to the garden.
Phew, that was close. And is that where he got his fear of fire?
That and the allotment shed.
Say what?
Well, we know Tom liked to explore, and as there was a river within walking distance, it was an ideal trek, and he would spend a lot of time there.
Sounds dangerous.
For some people, anywhere can be dangerous, but this time it was later in the year and it started to rain and he was getting cold.
Don't like the way this is going.
Anyway, he knew he could get shelter in the huts on an allotment, so he opened the door and sat inside to get warm. Inside was a small paraffin heater, which were commonplace at this time.
He didn't.
I'm afraid so. So he decided to use it. Everything was fine until it was time to leave. Somehow, and he's not sure what he did, but the heater was now on its side and leaking fuel. Within seconds, that end of the hut was ablaze, and the only means of escape was to jump through the flames to the door before the flames started to spread, and made it with just a few singed edges.
Looking back, that decision most likely saved his life.
And finally to that ugly section in this period.
Phew, I thought he'd escaped this time.
Okay, he did electrocute himself a couple of times, multiple cuts and grazes. And now I think about it, there's definitely an ugly bit at the end.
Doesn't sound too bad.
Well, too bad might be slightly misleading.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
All right. So on one of his outings on his bike, he was coming down a steep hill when his brakes jammed and flipped him over the handlebars, where he skidded face down the hill until he came to a stop. He was left shaken.
But not stirred.
Anyway, when he came to his senses, he looked down and saw that several holes had appeared in his shirt at the elbows and on his stomach, and through them he could see a lot of blood. Also, the palms of his hands looked like someone had used a cheese grater on them. It was then that he felt something dripping off his chin, only to find out later that the right side of his face had also been affected. He remembers it was an uncomfortable journey home.
Did nobody stop to help him?
No, he asked one man if he could help, but he just ignored him and walked away. And that was probably the last time he asked an adult for help.
Anything else?
Well, he did miss out on a lot when he would get tonsillitis 4 or 5 times a year. Oh, and seemed to be taking penicillin most of the time.
Didn't they hand penicillin out like sweets back then?
They did, right up to the time he had a bad allergic reaction to it and couldn't chance taking it anymore.
What happened?
It started with a small rash on his arm and quickly spread to his whole body. He remembers it was extremely itchy and almost drove him crazy.
Oh, is that where it started?
Very good. I see what you did then. But no, the itching was constant and everywhere.
Everywhere?
Yes, from between his toes to the top of his scalp, and lasted for over a week with nothing easing it. It finally stopped itching when his skin changed to a blue colour and went as hard as leather. Oh, one last thing, and this one affected him most as a child.
Don't like the sound of that.
No, and this out of all the ugly is one that's hardest to tell. As I've mentioned, he was the sporty one, and way back. Sorry, Brian couldn't resist, mate. At this time, dogs were often let out in the day to roam the streets by themselves, or in packs.
Much like the kids then.
True, and his dog would often escape to the local park at the end of his street, especially when she was in heat, as most dogs weren't spayed back then. Anyway, on one of these occasions, she ran off and Tom went off to retrieve her. And as we've mentioned, Tom was a sprightly boy and managed to keep up with her. Just as he reached the end of the street, the dog shot into the road in front of a car and went under the front and rear wheels. Somehow she still got up and staggered into a garden. Tom went over to help, but even at that age it was obvious there was nothing he could do but hold her until she passed away.
That sounds traumatic for a young boy. What did his parents say?
Nothing, and strangely, like many events in his life, things were never discussed.
Well, that puts a damper on things.
Yes, it's hard to end this video on a positive quip, but things will be back to normal next time.
Not sure what his normal is though.
Yes, I think we will all be glad when his childhood is over. Okay, we will leave it there and we'll be covering the years 14 to 21 next time.
Whatever could go wrong.
Indeed. The Life of Tom Ploy is a Foul Attire production.
Write a song about atmospheric 1930s smoke filled nightclub with the female singer, a brass section and drums like in a burlesque cabaret. Write a song about atmospheric 1930s smoke filled nightclub with the female singer, a brass section and drums like in a burlesque cabaret.